AITA for breaking up with my fiancé after she hit my face and caused serious medical damage. I am 27M, and my ex-fiancé is an attractive 25-year-old woman. We had a fairly decent relationship for 5 years and plan to marry in fall 2025. No kids. We both have professional jobs, shared and individual interests, and our own group of friends. We probably would have had a nice life together. I've always known about her excessive and over-the-top fear of insects, especially spiders and worms, and I've always done my best to be sensitive to this. Complete avoidance is impossible. One evening at a friend's house, we were sitting out on a back patio with the other couple talking, roasting marshmallows, having a few beers, and having a nice night. The next thing I remember is waking up in the ER with her crying and explaining what had happened. She saw a non-venomous spider on my forehead that I was not even aware of and freaked out. She picked up a cheap metal container that held a citronella candle and proceeded to bash my forehead. She thinks 5 times, until she was sure the spider was gone. The result was 8 staples, internal brain trauma, and second-degree burns all over my face. It's been 6 months since this happened, and the burn scars are still slightly visible. I could tell that she genuinely felt bad, and after a couple days of rest, I really felt bad for her too. I didn't want to see her feeling guilty for her compulsion, but at the same time, after thinking and talking to friends, I decided it was best to call the engagement off. I explained that I really didn't blame her, and also that I didn't want her to blame herself for my injuries, but that I personally didn't want to go through another situation like that again. A few days later, after failing to convince me to change my mind, she left and I haven't heard from her since. It's been 6 months since the event, and of course I miss her, but I'm wondering if I was wrong here. She had freaked out in the past when insects had scared her, but never to the point of harming anyone. She wasn't able to explain why she had reacted like this. She was not drunk, and the people whose house we were at were very close friends. I really don't understand, but it has caused lasting damage to me. Edit. I've had and responded to several questions about my friends. Rather than keeping responding one off, I'll add the edit here. I largely didn't include anything about them above because they couldn't do much. My longtime friend, the guy, was the one who took the candle from her and his wife called 911. I was sitting next to my ex, and the other couple was directly across the fire pit. According to my friend, it happened fast and unexpectedly. Sounds like the paramedics were there less than 10 minutes after it happened. Neither of them remember seeing a spider or any other bug, and both said that my ex was freaked out when she saw what she'd done to me. Like she didn't remember. But she did remember because she told me the story in the hospital. In any event, the guy is the one who strongly supported me when I decided to leave her. Now on to the next story. Story 2. AITA for canceling my life insurance policy because my husband won't make a beneficiary on his. I, 42F, have been married to my husband, 46M, for a little over a year. We were together 2 years before we were married, but had been friends for 5 years before we began dating. I have 2 adult daughters from my first marriage. Their dad and I divorced as friends, and we had and still have a good relationship as co-parents. My husband and kids consider themselves friends rather than stepdad or stepkids. I have carried a significant life insurance policy for my daughters in addition to the policy I have through work for many years. I upped my policy a few years ago because I lost both of my parents in my 30s. They were divorced, and as the legal next of kin, I had to deal with the fallout for both of them, including a lot of expense. I didn't want my daughters to have to deal with that. So if I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, my daughters will split $250,000 plus another $100,000 through my work. When I got married again, I took out a separate $100,000 policy for my husband. As my, now, legal next of kin, he would be the one tasked with tying up my loose ends. I couldn't imagine my 21-year-old daughter having to go through what I went through when I was in my late 30s. The funeral home, the bank, the insurance company, and he earns less than me. It would be enough to get him settled without me. He has a $100,000 policy through work. After I took out my policy for him, I asked him what he needed to change me to his beneficiary. He asked me what I meant. His mother is his sole beneficiary, and he explained that he is not going to change that. His mom is married to a plastic surgeon. They live in a $3 million home on the other side of the country. She hasn't visited him in 10 years. She hates my guts because, even though her son is a blue-collar worker that I out-earn, she thinks I married him for his money. She didn't even come to the wedding. If he dies, I will be left with trying to sort out his estate with nothing. In his defense, he has never been the legal next of kin when someone dies. But his mom doesn't need that money, and she surely would not step in or help me. I'd be on my own. I asked him again last week if he had updated his beneficiary status. He hadn't. So I called Fidelity and canceled my policy for him. I also changed my pod on my bank account for 01k and employee stock to exclusively my kids. Now he is yelling about how everyone is on vacation and he can't talk to them about it. Even though I first asked him about it a year ago, he called me an for leaving him with nothing, even though that is what he would essentially be doing to me. Now on to the next story. Story 2. AITA for clarifying via social media post that my wife's baby was the product of her illicit affairs. My M49 wife Cynthia, F45, got pregnant against my will. After we had discussed and agreed on not having any more kids, we already have F18, M13, M8, M4. I was scheduled for a vasectomy. She claimed she was on the pill, but I was using condoms because I wanted to make sure nothing happened. I had my vasectomy, but she was pregnant a few weeks later. She was overjoyed and I wasn't. I didn't want to be an old dad. She claimed the pills didn't work. I never pushed for her getting surgery because I know it's harder for women, and she said injectable contraceptives hurt her health. I checked all my condoms and all of them had been pierced. We had a huge argument that ended with her crying. My trust has been destroyed. I assume that nothing she says is true. She also got fired when she was 3 months pregnant. I found it weird that she didn't fight it. Then she said she needed to stay home, which is exactly what I dreaded. She said morning sickness was too bad to go to work. For our entire 18 years of marriage, she has pushed to be a psalm. We can't afford it. She gave me the silent treatment for weeks after our second was born when I said she needed to find a job. I never heard the end of it, as she calls it, when I made her leave our baby and sent her to get a job, like I had ripped her away from our kid. I got suspicious, thinking that perhaps she had resigned and was lying. I know it's wrong, but I got into her phone. Long story short, she had a workplace affair, and she and her AP both got canned. She slept with him during her training out of state and eventually scheduled every assignment out of town to cheat with him. He is in his late 50s, married. She also slept with my cousin's son, Nelson M29, and he's a drug addict. I saw and heard messages between them. He would come to my house when I was out. I have asked the neighbor, and they confirmed. My neighbor said Nelson would show up sometimes 2 days in a row when I was out. I checked my schedule, and it could have been when I went to Ohio for 3 weeks. I came home on weekends, but everything seemed normal. What's worse is that Nelson calls me uncle. I let him stay over a couple of times. She also used our own kids, our 2 youngest, as leverage, promising that he could see them if he didn't pressure her, and kept his mouth shut. So she obviously put him in some type of a stepdaddy role. She told him the pregnancy was his baby. I hate him, but I think she manipulated him because he has zero relationship with his parents or his siblings, and he kept texting her about how she was like home to him. I lost it and woke her up. She tried to claim that she was SA by both men, then said she was pressured into it because they threatened her. I confronted both men. I reached out to her ex-co-worker via social media, but he blocked me after a couple of exchanged messages. Nelson did get belligerent, and it could have probably ended in a real fight if I had him in front of me. The paternity test came as negative. I moved out and got a lawyer. I refused to be at the hospital during childbirth. It was a stillborn. I was shocked. Even if it wasn't mine, it felt dark and strange. I offered my kids emotional support, but didn't allow her to cry to me. I had to get a court order to get a DNA test on all our kids, they're mine. A few weeks ago, people on Facebook started asking questions and attempting to call me out for not posting anything about the baby. I think she might have told someone that I wasn't present at childbirth because a couple of people came at me. We are getting a divorce, and I'm very angry that she's still trying to milk it. I told each person the truth separately, but eventually got fed up with looking like the bad guy and wrote a post saying thank you to everyone who has reached out to insult me, but the baby was not my child as per the paternity test. It had to step away from social media because of it. Her family called me, asking to take it down. They didn't know the full story but said, this is not how things get solved. I'm not deleting it, despite being called out for shaming. While I worked my ass off for our family, she was texting her best friend and complaining about how I'm not the shadow of my former self, how I look old and let myself go. Her friend had an angry response, but they are not on speaking terms anymore. Cynthia claimed that her friend ghosted her, and she doesn't know why. I'm suing for custody, since she repeatedly took my kids across the state so that Nelson could hang out with them and left them with her dad before I came home from work so that she could go do work stuff and have sex outside of our marriage. She had been begging me not to ever tell the kids about the paternity test, but they needed to know the truth before she twisted the narrative. My daughter won't speak to her, and our second child wants to come live with me. I'm sick of crying sporadically because sometimes I'm driving and can't hold it in. I can't even watch P*RN because she and her APs come to mind. I had a family, and despite everything, I was proud and happy, and she took it away. I didn't know she saw me as less. She told her ex-best friend that she loved watching the executives in her job. At least her friend defended me, although we are not close. My lawyer says we should contact her as a character witness. I hate Cynthia, and I told her during her pregnancy when she wanted to initiate sex. She's naturally overweight, and I loved her as such, but I hated the knocked up by the AP version of her. I told her she looked grotesque like Jabba the Hutt. Her lawyer is pushing for family counseling. I would only agree to civil co-parenting, but nothing oriented at couples reconciliation bullshit. She calls it a mistake, but to me, she bred via infidelity and created an entire human being, and I will never forget that. Thank you everyone who subscribed me and liked my videos.